Welcome to Melbourne Jewish Book Week and Hila Blum on love and literature. I'm Tali Lavi, a writer and critic from Melbourne. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on lands of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners and custodians of this land, and pay respect to their elders, past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. Please make sure that your phone is on silent. Now, Hila was meant to be sitting here today, and instead she is sitting here and she's in the room with us, but you're not going to see her quite yet. In a minute, you will see her, or maybe you will see her right now. And I just want to say how amazing Hila is, because it is 4:30 a.m. Jerusalem time. I don't know if you can hear them. And the room is pretty full here, but it's 11:30 a.m. our time. And due to the circumstances in Israel, which are really destabilizing and distressing, Hila made the decision that she couldn't take the uncertainty of coming. So we are all so very happy that you are here. And I'm going to first introduce you before we speak to you. So do please laugh, applaud as loudly as you can so Hila can feel you. And we will leave the last few minutes available for questions. Hila Blum was born in Jerusalem, the city in which she lives today. She first established herself as a journalist and has been a literary editor for over 25 years. Her first novel, Habikul, The Visit, was published in 2011 and was shortlisted for Israel's major literary award, the Sapir Prize for Israeli Literature. It is a portrait, did I say long-listed? It is a portrait.
Long-listed.
Long-listed. I said, yeah. I was thinking of long-listed, but I said short-listed. Obviously, you know, I know better than the judges. It is a portrait of a family whose fragile balance is placed into turmoil from a visitor. About it, Zruya Shalev wrote, Blum works wonders in describing the high and low tides of life. She moves between mundane routine and profound spiritual depth, whilst Etgar Keret termed it a moving and impressive novel of a heart-shattering and anxiety-filled world. Hila's most recent novel, Ech le'ehov et bitech, How to Love Your Daughter, was originally published in Hebrew in 2020, and thankfully for us, it was published in English last year. This masterful novel catapults us deep into a relationship between a mother and her daughter. Hila pulls off the impossible, for whilst the story holds the reader in a vice of dread and wonder, from its opening to its closing line, her prose is so beautifully rendered that we find ourselves pausing to revel in it, whilst never actually leaving its world. How to Love Your Daughter is a masterclass in psychology and an excavation of a relationship's fault lines, but also its treasures. The novel won the Sapir Prize in 2022. For this and for so much else, it brings me great joy to welcome Hila Blum.
Thank you so much.
Hila, I'd like to take our audience to the very opening of your book. It is a scene of emotional intensity because it takes us to the heart of the story's drama. Can you tell us about this scene and how it came about?
Sure. So firstly, really, just a warm hello to everyone out there with you, Tali. And thank you so much for this super kind introduction. And I'm so sad that about not being there with you in person today. And as you acknowledged, we are going through very difficult days here in Israel with this very strong, I would say, presence of the unknown. And so it's really good that we have the opportunity to speak via Zoom, and I thank you for that. And yes, it is now 4:38 in the morning here, and I've never been interviewed at this hour. So we'll see how it goes. And just another small correction, it won the Superior Prize for 2021. So, and now I can start off with the answer to your question. So, yeah, so when I had just set up to write the novel, I was considering various ways to approach, I think, two main themes. So one had to do with the potential of benign parenting intentions to lead to quite miserable outcomes. And at the time, I mean, when I had just embarked on writing this novel, my daughter was still quite young. She was about 7 or 8 years old at the time. And as a relatively new parent, I was struck by the enormous, seemingly infinite number of daily decisions, that parenting demanded. Some were small, some big, but all kinds of decisions. And I was thinking about the inability to predict the accumulating effect of all these decisions, and I was concerned about it. And so I sought to explore it through fictional writing. And so that was the one thing that I have in mind. And another had to do with, I would say, the resilience of our childhood recollections. And I mean, although we all have been inevitably, I mean, we all have been firsthand witnesses to our own childhoods. I mean, no one replaced us there, right? We were there. Uh, um, in many instances, the information that we have about our early years, the information that we carry about our childhoods is such that has undergone a great deal of mediation and processing, whether intentionally or not, by the way. So I had sat down to write about these, and I did not start with formulating a plot or with any sort of prearrangement. As I said, I had the knowledge of these themes and sentiments and that I wanted to explore, and I was considering various characters and predicaments in order to address them. And at a certain point, I started writing these two fictional figures of Yoella and her daughter Leah. And for quite a while, I had only like a very general idea of how their relationship might evolve. And then there was a moment in the writing that I remember I scrolled up to the top of the document and I typed these words, "How to Love Your Daughter." And it was like a moment of mapping for myself where to search for the core of the story that I was trying to tell. And at a certain point in the process, I realized that Yoella and Leah, were heading towards an estrangement. And then that scene of Yoella standing in front of her daughter's home in the Netherlands and spying on her and looking inside with the daughter not knowing that she's out there, that scene had materialized in my mind. And so I wrote it. And after some consideration, I decided to place it at the opening of the book. And so that's how it came about.
It makes so much sense because as a reader, and if you're a reader who is a mother or has been a daughter, which you have been if you're female, then there are these small anxieties that tip into big anxieties. So it becomes much. It's obviously you're pushing it to like the extreme, but along the way, it's not that extreme with what we begin with, right? Except for your opening, which is the heart of the estrangement, because she's looking in, and
right.
So that really makes sense in terms of what you sought to explore, and how you then realized it, and how it sets off all these anxieties in the reader.
It was like, really gradual to understand where I was heading, what was going on. You come to learn them, you try out different scenes and different reactions, and then some of them you keep and some of them you dismiss, and then gradually I realized, okay, this is where this is heading. So
I want to also just note that in that opening scene, it actually, Yoella is looking onto this quite a beautiful portrait of a family. It's almost like if you were a Dutch master, it would be rendered in oils, and there'd be this sense of love that she's looking onto.
Right.
And yet you've managed to translate it or maybe set it in with, so it's a different emotional tenor that we come to, and it's one of kind of the strange, the unfamiliar. Was
Right.
that sense something that you were writing into, or did it just manifest itself?
You know, there's so little, planning or awareness in that sense during the writing. And so this kind of thoughts and beautiful things that you can come to think about it, such as those that you said, they don't accompany at all when I write. It's like it's the afterthought. It's like, you know, the hindsight of what I was doing. And no, but we were discussing a little bit, like, you know, that you talk about a Dutch portrait, and then, you know, I could theoretically place Les' new life, I mean, anywhere in the world that I wanted, but when I was writing it. But it was clear to me that it would be in the Netherlands, and that was for two reasons. So, firstly, I love the Netherlands, and I have been there a number of times, and I always love going there. And you know, writing a novel can be such a long process, and in the case of each of my two novels, it was almost a decade each, by the way. So I said, you know, if I was going to spend several years with the story, and if I was going to create a fictive world outside of Israel and spend so much time with it in my thoughts, it was clear to me that it should be a country that is close to my heart. So, so I took the Netherlands, and then when I was trying to decide exactly where in the Netherlands to place this part of the plot, I knew that I had to choose a city that, on the one hand, would not be like Amsterdam or Rotterdam or even The Hague, because they are visited by so many Israeli tourists every year. And I wanted to choose a city in which potentially an Israeli woman could live for many years under the radar, so to speak. And on the other hand, again, for reasons that had to do with the plot, I wanted it to be a place not too small, a city in which she would still be likely to be spotted. And so I decided on Groningen. Now, though I have been in the Netherlands like many times, as I said, at the time I have not yet been to Groningen. And but I did know someone that lived there for many years, and she said that if I have any research questions, she'll be happily help me with them. And I had a lot of questions. And you know, when writing about a place from distance, you have to think about a lot of aspects in the description that need to be examined. And I mean, you have to think about needing to examine them. I mean, like research, which is often a part of writing, is, among other things, also about being able to think of the things that you would want to check in order to produce like a credible description. And for example, in the book there were many examples, but I'll just give you one. If I tell about Yoella standing outside of her granddaughter's school at night and running her hand along the school's fence, I would like to think that I need to check whether it's likely that a school in Groningen would have a fence, you know, because that is, you know, you need to check this. So I had a lot of questions for her. And well, another thing I could say about it is, after the book was published, we headed for yet another family vacation in the Netherlands. And this time we were staying at a place which was about, I think, an hour and a half drive from Groningen. And, you know, I said, this time we're going there. I mean, I really wanted to see Groningen finally. And I have been carrying this mental image of it for so long, and I wanted to see the city, you know, with my own eyes. So we drove there. And I remember telling myself on the way to intentionally make a detailed mental note of how I envision it now before I see it, because I wanted to be able to like hold on to both of the sites, you know. And because I've noticed it several times in the past, that right after you arrive at a place for the first time, it's often difficult to retrace how you imagined it from before. It's like the new image sort of takes over. So I was so excited to get there, and we parked and we started strolling the beautiful, beautiful streets of the city center of Groningen. And I was so moved by also seeing my novel there in Dutch. It was already translated in a bookstore. It was really magical. And my plan was to later, after visiting the center, to go see a few of Groningen's residential neighborhoods. But then I told my family, you know what? I changed my mind. Like, this is how open, so moving and exciting for me. And I want to live it as I wanted to only have my imagined window where Yoella stands and looks into, and just leave it at that. And so after spending like a lovely afternoon in the city center of Groningen, we just went back to our vacation resort, and yeah, so that was it.
I want to say congratulations, Hila, because I think that was the more compassionate response to yourself, because the stakes are so high at that point.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, it could have come down, but no, thankfully they didn't. I want to talk
Yeah.
about your Ella's love for Leah. So
Mhm.
there is a sentence where she says, "My love for Leah was the opposite of learning. It was the forgetting of everything." And there's an intoxication with this kind of heightened sense of love. When I read that sentence, I think of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. You know, I was obsessed in my teenage years with her proclamations for her love of Heathcliff and Linton. And but I wonder if you could talk to us about the two parts of this sentence. So the subject of it, my love for Leah, but also if you could speak to us about this idea, the forgetting of everything.
Hmm. Wow. But first I want to say this. You were saying about intoxication. I was not interested for myself. Yeah, I mean, this is the way I approach it. I was not interested in exploring toxic or abusive or pathologically ill parenting or kind of love of any kind. I was interested in exploring a parenting disposition that I could relate to, a tender relationship, a caring relationship. And the way I thought about it when I was portraying this kind of Yoella's love for Leah and their communication, that if this family were to live next door from me, I think what a nice family. You know, I think what a lovely mom and daughter. And in many ways they are lovely. And and that was like the point that if I were to live next door to them, I would not be suspicious that their relationship, this kind of love, could turn to something which is questionable in any way. So it was like exactly the gray areas within a tender love, within a caring parenthood that I wanted to explore. And by the way, because I always get asked about this, because like a lot of people talk about her mental state, Yoella, it same goes for her emotional difficulties. My impression is that so many of us undergo emotionally difficult periods over the course of a lifetime, and they're not a rarity, and quite the opposite, I think. And I don't view her story, her emotional story, as rare at all. Now, as for the kind of love, I would say that um, for me, it was like checking. It's so hard to even describe what parental love really is, and if I have to focus it the way I was looking at it, I was trying to search whether um, parental Yoella's love for Leah is something that rely that strives, you say, more on her ability and need to give, or on her ability and need to receive. And there's like always this tension between these two. And it's not like that I was looking for any concrete answers to this equation, or to figure it out. I just wanted to acknowledge for myself and for my characters, um, how how fluid this is, how it always plays between what you get and and what you give to the relationship. Also, as a parent, I mean, not only in romantic love, but also in parental love. So, does it answer in any way? Oh, what you
Yes,
were
and also
asking?
that uncertainty is, you don't know how it's going to land, because your child is other to you and what you want. And so that's part of the unknown that we set out to what is it, to come closer to a knowledge of when we become a parent. But each one is
Absolutely.
different. Yeah.
Absolutely. And also, being the parent, and in this case, being the mother, it grants you such a hold over your offspring. You might just, utter something, anything, to your child, and the child might even formulate a clear position against it. It's the very fact that you have just even said that, it has already created something of a weight in the child's world that will continue to sort of inflict its gravity. And I don't know that there's a way to stay aware of the infinite manifestations of this power, or to control it, or to undo it from either side. And of course, there's also the flip side of this power, which is vulnerability. Because when you have such great power, you're also very, very vulnerable to its results. So these for me were like the realms that I would try, to look into. Yeah. And
I want to talk about that great power. And I'm just going to read out a paragraph because it is one, not that I have any favorites, because there are many, but it's from chapter 20. So this is your Ella. I hold nothing back, what I know and what I remember. But memory is a malleable material meant for art. People sculpt in it and paint with it. They create with it, which is why I had often thought that had Leah been given a sibling, we would have been saved. But we were a dynasty of only daughters. My mother was my grandmother's only. I was my mother's only. In our homes, we were the only witnesses to our lives. Our story has never been split between its speakers or refuted. It was governed by our memories alone. We were alone in it, and because we looked normal, we had gone unsuspected. Yeah, if you could just feel the emotional tenor of the room, Hila. But I'd really like to talk about, because the stakes are higher also because, as you say, there's one. The
Yeah. I mean, as I was exploring, the characters, one of the first things that I realized about them is that I want them to be an only daughter of an only daughter. And because in such circumstances, I think in some sense, there is no one except the two of them who can retell a version of their lives. I mean, of their, of course, there's also a father, but a lot of their lives is, there's so many parts of life in which there were just the two of them present, and then there was no witnesses, and there's no one to help settle any disputes as to what had happened. And that's not to say that in the reality of siblings there is, I mean, there's always it's not to say that in the reality of siblings there are always agreement regarding the past. The reality of multiple siblings can certainly also carry its version of problems and disputes, but when you're an only child, then it's your version versus the parent's version, and that's it. And so I instinctively started writing Yoella and Leah through the first person of Yoella. And while slowly deciphering them, I felt that they had the tools to write Yoella's voice in all her complexity. And so I continued. But one major challenge in writing it was writing Leah through her. That is, in finding ways to sort of signal to the reader behind the narrator's back, behind Yoella's back, what Leah's version of the story might be. And that had to do a lot to do with tailoring the degree of reliability of Yoella as narrator. Although at the same time, I think that the novel also advocates the notion that there is no such thing as a completely reliable narrator, in the sense that no life can be fully chronicled, and that any retelling of a life is selective and subjective, by definition. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the time and thinking there's a lot we want to talk about. Maybe I will go to this. Okay, so Ella professors. I want to write about Leah in one go, everything there is, but oh, the needle's eye of language. Now, Hila, you've said that your novels take about 10 years, and that doesn't surprise me, and nor do I think that it's something to be I think it's something to be lauded instead of 10 years. Of course, it took 10 years. And part of that is the clarity of your prose. Your style is so distilled. And I wonder, is this part of how you relate to language as a writer? The, language is the needle's eye.
It's so nice to hear you saying it, but I don't know really. All I can say that is I erase more than I keep, for sure. when I say, first of all, I'm a super slow writer, and part of it is also because of just what I said, that I erase more than I keep. So I will write, and then I just don't like what comes out, and I'll just remove it, and then I'll have another go and another go. So yeah, no wonder it takes a decade. And also, but I'm not in a hurry, anywhere. And also, I always think about um, um, if I publish it, the moment I hand it to my editor, to my amazing editor, and publish it, then I will have to start everything all over again. And it's so difficult. So why don't I just hang on to it for a little longer? And so that's what I take my time. In other words, I take my time.
Well, it develops, and maybe that's like the gestational period of your characters, and you're talking about the changes that occur in people's lives. So it makes sense that it has to take time to work out what those changes might be.
Right.
Hila, but also you're an editor, right? So
Right.
is this something that is something natural to your experience of writing, or do you feel like when you're editing, obviously when you're editing someone else's work, it's quite a different thing?
Absolutely.
What is your relationship to the role of editing someone else's work?
First of all, it's what I've been doing for so many years, and I love it. I mean, I just love being an editor. But I want to maybe comment about the relationship, being an editor and then a reader. Because as an editor, you're trained to address text as a subject to change, and you work with your ability to grasp a text potential. And so after so many years of editing, I think that my basic reading stance is that of questioning, is a questioning one rather than an accepting one, and like there's no on and off switch for that. At least not that I have access to. So naturally, and also naturally as an editor, years of exploring text makes you very alert to their mechanism. So when I'm reading outside of context of work, like just for my own pleasure, the moment that I quit editing a book in my head is the moment that I have been fully captured as a reader. And this is a great moment, and it always takes me time to arrive at it, as a reader, because I keep looking at it as an editor, and then until I'm able to let go of that position and just get immersed in the story. Yeah.
And does it work differently in languages? So when you're reading in English and Hebrew, is there a change between that?
Well, for sure. I mean, because although I think I'm doing quite okay for 5:02 in the morning now, but I would have done much better if I could have done it in Hebrew. So yeah, so of course I'm fluent in English, but then there's still always a transition that has to be made when I read in English. And personally, although I can very easily read in English, if I want to read, really for my deepest pleasure, then I th- then of course Hebrew would come more naturally. I could get absorbed into in it more, and but about this when you write a story about the English thing, when you write a story or a novel, you cannot really experience it as a reader. I mean, there is this like whole thing with gap and stories being an intrinsic part of the mechanism of fiction and of our experience of it. And so, for example, when we read a book we wrote ourselves, we know how it evolves and how it ends, and we have no way to undo this knowledge, right? There's no way for us to forget how it evolves and ends. And so, everything that we read, we will read in light of this knowledge. But when a reader reads us, his or her reading experience, as by and large, certainly in the first reading, is based on not knowing how it evolves. It is based on raising hypotheses and on filling in the gaps with our thoughts. And I refer to this in light of your question because, the book was purchased for translation in quite a few languages, but the only one among them that I could actually read and comment on was the English translation, which was done, I think incredibly by Danielle Zamir. And reading that translation was for me the closest experience I had to reading the book as a reader, because of course also in English I know what is going to happen, of course, on every page, but yet the transition from language to language, it canceled something of the automation of the reading. So reading the English was the closest I could get to it, reading it as a reader, and it was very, very powerful experience to be able to have to do that. So
It's interesting because I was thinking about this last night and about how it's almost akin to being a mother and seeing your child grow, and all of a sudden they enter the adolescence and they become something other, but they're still the same. So, and that, yeah, it felt like that was what it must be to read a book that you completely understand, that is a translation of your work.
Yeah, you say about this about what you said about the children. I remember when my child just started going to kindergarten, and sometimes when I would come to pick her up, before I porch her, I would wait like for a minute and look at her from a distance. And it was always so startling in those first instances to see how her in her autonomy, in her in this part of life that is hers, that I'm not part of, and it's not part of our family, and I think and then of course it becomes natural, because you get used to it. And I think that maybe for Yoella, this sort of experience is something that is prolonged throughout the years. It's not something that constantly she's startled by looking at Leah and seeing her in her autonomous life, like with her friends or anything else. Yeah, just a remark that came to me now that you said that.
No, because you write about it so well. You encapsulate that feeling. I'm just going to one of the quotes where she's looking at her and her friend, and first of all, it's about their relationship to social media. So this is a thing that has only happened in a generation. Obviously, there would have been some kind of iteration of it in other generations, that you see your child engage with a world that is not your own. But social media has another kind of working. And you write, the world is bathed in a beautiful white light that siphons off teenage girls' energy. Again, I just want to, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about that. In my day and age, if you had, say, like social difficulties at school, there was some sort of separation between the different parts of the day, in the sense that you would go home after school, and at least like for a few hours, you had sort of like some sort of refuge. For a few hours, you were out of reach of your peers. And today, in many ways, there is no such separation. The social networks are always out there and they're active. And so the boundaries between one's alone time and one's social times, they have been blurred. And I think that Yoella also goes through this technological transition with its social implication, with its blurring of the boundaries between the private time and the social time. simultaneously with becoming a mother. That is, she becomes aware of the blurring of boundaries through her daughter. And this is another thing that is difficult for her. It's another aspect in her daughter's life that she feels disoriented by. And so
I want to take you back to your childhood and the way that literature and reading worked on you. Your Ella writes, my entire childhood I'd taken refuge in books. What was your own relationship to books growing up, Hila?
kind of similar, I think. Yeah, I was a huge reader as a child and as an adolescent. I'm still an avid reader, but there's so much more going on today. And in my childhood, that was a huge part of my childhood. Yeah.
And
yeah.
Did you have any writers who inspired you to write, or were there certain books that you used to go back to?
Well, nowadays, of course, there are certain books that I would go back to. I don't think I would read them like start to end, but I would go. Suddenly, I'll have an urge to go back and read a certain part in something that is very dear to me, and I would do that. And there are so many writers who were central to my reading life, and also to my gradual learning and understanding of how stories and novels work and what can be done through this art. And I think that my favorite books are those whose writers, they not only know how to tailor very carefully what is said in them, but they also know how to tailor very carefully what is kept unsaid. And I think these are my favorite books.
No surprise. Not for someone who's read your work. I think this is probably what people have been waiting for me to ask. One of the things, but I wanted to speak about your work, but I would like to speak to you about the experience of writing and reading after the catastrophe of October the 7th. Were you able to write in the immediate aftermath?
From the first weeks after October 7th, what I mainly recall is like a feeling of shock. And I remember being asked to give interviews for foreign media and sitting in my room and just thinking, how am I going to do this? As a writer, I should trust the power of words, and I do. But I also know that there are times when you need them the most and they desert you. And at the early days of it all, I was really at a loss of words. I couldn't. And I couldn't even think about going back to my own writings. I don't know to say if it's because life in its whole had been so violently disrupted, or if things that I worked on the 6th of October suddenly seemed to me irrelevant on the 7th, probably some of both. But then a few months ago, I started writing again, at first just a bit, and then more and more, and it became a hugely meaningful time, and even therapeutic time for me, these writing sessions. And what happened is so enormous that next to it, almost everything seems marginal and minor, but that's of course not so. Life with all its minute details is still just as important, and writing is important. And I think though it will take time to allow ourselves the mental and emotional space to address our new reality in a way that will wholly include our before lives. Like, this integration takes time, and we're still in the process of it, for sure. So.
And what about your relationship to reading? Did you find it a source of solace, or was that also just disrupted for?
I think for the very first weeks, all I could read was testimonies. That's the only thing that I could read. And of course, gradually you go back to working. My working involves a lot of reading, so etc. Yeah, but it took a while, and it's still a process. I mean, it's been almost a year, but we're still there, absolutely, in so many ways. So many ways. So. Yeah.
At that point, I can't be greedy, although I have been greedy, because I think we only have like room for 1 or 2 questions, if there is. But there is a question, so let's let that person ask.
Okay.
Here, I'm going to give you.
Hila, I was wondering what, in terms of a mother-child relationship, I just want to ask you about that. When I lived in the Northern Territory for a while, Northern Territory of Australia, I met a couple one night at someone's place, and the woman was an actress and very elaborate in her manner and so on. And she mentioned she had 2 little girls, 5 and 7 years old, and she mentioned that the responsibility of having these children, even though she loved them dearly, was so overwhelming that she sometimes felt that if they walked near a cliff, she would be tempted to push them over the cliff. She couldn't bear the responsibility. So have you come across this, or in your research, or in your thinking about a parental relationship?
Gladly, I say no, not at all. For me, I think the hardest part was being pregnant, and then once my child was there, everything became so much easier. But contemplating about it, before you see her, before you start nourishing her, taking care of her, that was very intimidating for me personally. But I'm just talking about myself. And taking it day by day and growing my child. No, I was very comfortable with it personally.
Oh, there is another question. I don't know. Is it a short question, or is it Is it around the book, or yeah? Okay, it's about the book. We'll allow another question.
It's about the book, and it's beautiful. I only read it in translation because my Hebrew isn't good enough. But my question is, at the end of the book, Leah is an adult, and we're all, or many of us are adult daughters of well-meaning and perfect mothers, as we are ourselves. What's the next stage? Is there how to forgive your mother?
No, I'm not going to talk about much about what I'm working on.
Or
now, but I would say it's still within the family realm. What?
You still? No, you're still up there. Good. It's fine.
Yeah. So if I understand the question correctly, about what I'm doing now is so I'm still within the family realm, but now I'm more focused on siblings. So yeah, I'm going there now. So we'll see where it leads me, but yeah.
Hila, thank you for your generosity. I don't know many other people who would have agreed to talk to us at this ungodly hour. We hope to welcome you to Melbourne another time, and may this distressing period for Israel change to one of calm and restoration. May the hostages be returned, and may there be peace
Amen.
one day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
How to Love Your Daughter is for sale by Avenue Bookstore in the Hub. If you haven't read it already, you are in for an unforgettable ride. Hila, toda.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Tali.